physical issue, let's say. Senator Champion, I see that you have an author's amendment that we'll adopt to get the bill in shape, and Senator Westland will move the A7 author's amendment. All in favor? We do have a quorum now. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The author's amendment is adopted. Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee. Thank you for taking the time today to hear Senate File 26, which is affectionately known as Restore the Vote. You know, I sometimes say that, many different people say it, because it gets right to the heart of the matter when we think in terms of what Senate File 26 will do. You all recognize that under Minnesota Statute 609.165 is that if a person is on felony probation, their right to vote is taken. They can't vote. No matter how long they've been paying taxes in our communities, raising children, doing pro-social activities, being a contributing member to society, they can't make a decision or be a part of the decision-making process for park board, school board, city council, the state legislature, federal government, not even for the board on taxation. And usually when we see that on our ballot, we don't know what that person does. But what is clear is that our democracy, or bedrock of our democracy, is the ability for one to lend their voice into elected positions. You know, I was thinking about what I would say before this group, because I've been working on this for quite some time, and I've been talking to a number of you, both individually, about the importance of this piece of legislation. And let me turn your attention to the fact that we have a support letter from the Minnesota County Attorneys Association where they strongly support this, so that letter should be found in your packet. We also should have something from the Attorney General's office as well, and just a cross-section of other groups who understands the importance of this. But let me say this. This important piece of legislation addresses a number of barriers or confusion that happens in our society when we think in terms of this notion to vote. And perhaps the best illustration of the need for this bill can be seen in two quick stories that I will share. One is, most people know that I door knock even during non-election years. I do that because I think it's important to engage community so that they can tell me what they think, or it's just an opportunity for me to have an opportunity to talk to them. And when I'm out door knocking, here's the first thing that happens from time to time. I go to the door, knock on the door, I'd say, hey, if they open the door, because, you know, some people are home, some people are not, so I do it at different times. And when they come to the door, I engage them in a discussion. Hey, my name is Bobby Joe Champion. I represent you in the Senate. And I'm just knocking on doors just to, you know, talk to you so that you're clear as to what's going on in the legislature. And sometimes they stop me immediately and say, hey, wait a minute, is this an election year? And then I have to calm them down and say, no, I'm just, you know, knocking on doors because it's the right thing to do. And they go, oh my God, okay. Like, this is a non-election year and you're knocking at my door? And I say, yes. So I continue. And I'll say, hey, you know, I talk about, you know, what's important to you? Tell me about that. And they go on to tell me, and so on and so forth. And during those years when it is an election year, I would say, I hope that I can get your support when it's time to vote. And so they say, well, you know what? You're really good. I do like that part, when they tell me that I'm really good. And they say, but I can't vote. I said, well, what do you mean that you can't vote? Person says, hey, you know, I can't vote because I'm a felon. And then I have a series of questions that I ask them. I say, well, okay. Are you on probation? They say, no, I'm not on probation. I said, okay, then you can vote. And then they say, no, I can't vote. I say, yes, you can vote. They say, no, I can't vote. I say, who's the lawyer here, me or you? And they laugh and they say, well, you're the lawyer. Because there's so much misinformation out in the marketplace that even though I would ask them if they're not on paper, that means that they're no longer on probation, then they say they can't vote. What's the other story? Other story is the same conversation, and then what happens is that somebody says, well, I think I can, I'm no longer on probation. I don't know. I don't have to check in with my probation officer anymore. It's been quite some time. I think I don't know if I'm able to vote. But they're out. And sometimes when you think in terms of administrative probation, it means that your file lays dormant because you've fulfilled everything as it pertains to probation. And some people just don't know, even when they're off probation or when they can go and vote, so that it will not violate our election laws. But those are two different situations, but very important when we think in terms of the work that needs to be done. So when you think in terms of Senate File 26, this bill allows individuals who've been convicted of a felony to have the voting rights restored as soon as they've completed their sentence of incarceration. It's very bright, it's very clean, it's clear, and then there are no challenges. One other component of this bill is that it requires the Secretary of State's office to develop information about voting rights of those who have been charged with or convicted of a crime, and to distribute that information to the right places, including judges and probation officers, and correction and parole and probation staff. Last but certainly not least, two other components of it is that the state's correction system must give notice to and information about an individual's rights to vote upon release from incarceration, and it has an effective date of July 1st. Now, we also think that it is important for us to think about that amendment that was put forward, because that updates the Voters' Bill of Rights to reflect that individuals with felonies who are no longer incarcerated have the right to vote, and adds a $13,000 appropriation to cover the fiscal cost. So that's the cost in order to make this work. Now, I know some of you, and I'll be happy to engage you in discussion about this, will say a number of things. One, why don't we just cut down on the probationary terms here in the great state of Minnesota, because we have longer probationary terms, and then that way that might address it by cutting it down. I say, why don't we do two things? We can cut down the probationary sentences and still give people who are not incarcerated the right to vote. A second argument that most people say is, hey, if there's an individual who has not completed their sentence, it is because they have not completed all the terms of what the court asked for them to do, which is not vote, and this is a consequence of their sentence. Well, not necessarily, because usually when you think in terms of sentencing, there should be a nexus between your behavior and what you are no longer able to do. So it should not be that individuals are not able to vote because they did something outside of the realm of voting, and therefore we take away a tool that our democracy believes to be important, which is the right to vote. Everyone should have the right to vote. Last but certainly not least, I've heard people say, why don't we just carve out time, certain infractions, and we shouldn't let them vote, but we should let other people vote. Well, that gets muddy, and it causes more confusion than it does solve a problem. If a person is not incarcerated, and if they're doing everything that they are supposed to do, then we should judge them on their skills and qualifications, and not perpetually punish them for their past. That is what I would say. But I believe that it's important for us not to continue to disenfranchise voters. We should allow them the opportunity to vote. Now, who will this address? Some people say it's 50,000 people. Some people say 53,000 people. Some people say 57,000 people. Whatever the number is, if you think up as high as 57,000 people are felons in our communities who cannot vote even though they're paying taxes, they should be allowed to vote. Now, here's the thing. Most people think that 57,000 comes from Minneapolis or St. Paul, when in fact the data will show you that only 36% of that, whatever that number is, comes from Ramsey County and Hennepin County. 64% come from outstate and other places. So this is a Minnesota problem. And in fact, it will benefit those who are outstate and in other rural areas as well. So I hope that you will pass this bill, join the other states who restrict the right to vote only while individuals with felonies are incarcerated. And Minnesota will be added to that group of being progressive and thoughtful and understand the importance of democracy. And I want to know also later, we also have the Secretary of State who is with us, and he supports the bill, and the ACLU as well as other groups support this bill as well. So with that, I know that there are others that are probably listed in your committee brief and just other information that we can make sure that you are aware of, because I hope that you will join me in supporting this bill so that we can make sure that we do not continue to disenfranchise Minnesotans. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and hopefully that was some opening remarks, and if you want any of the others to come forward, because I know Secretary of State Steve Simon is with us as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee.
Champion, thank you. We have a question here. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Chair. I would like to add, most of you have heard this by now, but I've been an election judge since 2018 through every cycle, and people would often ask me what my favorite part is, and I used to always say it was watching people come bring their kids in, right? Because it just set that wonderful example, and the kids were excited and they wanted to help. In the 2020 general, because there were 3 different elections we had to do that year with the presidential primary, and the presidential. In the general, again, working as a head judge, so kind of supervising a site, I had someone, we used the poll pads, and there was a flag for someone in the system, and so I got called over because no one had ever seen it before. And when I got over there, I realized it was someone that was being able to vote for the first time after meeting all of their requirements. I will say that has become one of my favorite stories of helping people, of helping someone vote, because you could tell how proud that person was to have their right back, how meaningful that was to them, and how I think appreciative they were that they were treated with dignity and respect and grace, being able to exercise their right. So I would just like to give that real person perspective of this does mean a lot to people. I have seen it. So I would just like to say I strongly support Senator Champion's bill, and I encourage other people to vote on for it. Thank you.
Senator Champion. Thank you, Senator Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. And thank you for your work being an election judge, because we do need as many individuals from our communities being election judges, because it is important. A couple things that you lift. Number one is that pro-social, well, all the data says that when individuals are involved in pro-social activities, the chance of them returning to prison or life of crime decreases. We think it's important in order for individuals to also model certain behavior for children. Senator Swazinski will tell you this, even just being a teacher, how important it is to model things for children. And when children see you involved in voting, the chances of them becoming voters dramatically increases. Unfortunately, the other person who had been working on this bill even before I got it was a guy by the name of Randy Statton, who was a representative before, and then our Attorney General Keith Ellison worked on this bill before. And then when I came to the House and then the Senate, I picked up the mantle because it was very important for us to do this work. Well, you might wonder, why do why have we all picked up this mantle is because democracy is important. Voting is important. And so thank you for being an election judge. We want to make sure that individuals who are in our communities, who are paying taxes, who are raising children, who are involved in pro-social activities, that we say you should go in and vote and be a part of our democracy. And I said our, because it's not just reserved for some, it is our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Champion. I'm going to caution members to be real quick with your comments because we do have a question period, which is going to be followed by member comments. So, Senator Rest.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Champion. In 2015, of course, you had Senate File 355, which was also a bill to restore the right to vote. How is your bill today different? I'm trying to look that up right now. Different from that bill. And at that point in the Senate, did you have bipartisan authorship? And if you could just briefly say what the course of action was in the House, which stopped this bill after it had passed the Senate.
Mr. Chair, Senator Rest.
Senator Champion.
So as you know, I've talked about the work that I've done on this bill before now, as well as others, and your direct question as to how it's changed, it hasn't really changed much, right? Because I did have a couple different bills during that time. One was to make sure, say, hey, those who are not incarcerated should vote, and then I had one that was a little more extreme, I would say, that says even individuals who are incarcerated should vote. This one is just about individuals who are in our communities voting, because I believe that is the best place and the right place to be. And I would hope that you will agree with me. As it pertains to the bipartisan support, I've always had different folks from on both sides of the aisle talking about the importance of individuals who are not incarcerated having the right to vote. And we will continue to do that because we can see eye to eye on that. But where we did differ was whether a person should have to complete their probationary terms before they are able to vote. And I would hope that my friends on both sides of the aisle would see that this is the best way to go and that we should not create more barriers. We should just make sure that we have a system that works and that it works for all. And I believe what is articulated in Senate File 26 is a reflection of a policy that will and should work for all of us. So thank you, Senator Rest, for that question.
Senator Swedzinski.
Mr. Chair, do you wait for our comments in support of the bill after all the testifiers, or should I make my brief remarks now? And they're not that brief.
Make some brief remarks now, and you can make some more.
Well, what are your desires and wishes? Do you prefer me to go now or when the testifiers
No,
are done?
I don't want you to go now. I do want to
Got
hear the testifiers. Senator Coran.
No, I'm good.
You're good, okay. All right. You have Secretary of State Simon as your next testifier.
I do. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, please state your name for the record and continue with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. Thanks for the opportunity to weigh in on this bill. I want to thank Senator Champion for his long-standing leadership on this issue. I think many, many people are grateful for that and for him. I'll be brief because you have, I think, a lot of compelling testimony that will follow. But I see this as an opportunity to make things right. If someone, a judge, a jury, or someone else, deems somebody worthy enough, safe enough, a good enough risk, a sound enough bet to be among us, paying taxes, working alongside us, then surely that person is worthy enough to have a vote. At the time of Minnesota statehood in 1858, there were fewer than 75 felonies on the books, and there were no probationary sentences. Sentences were either all in prison or not at all. Now we have over 300 felonies, and 3/4 of those felonies result in some, often extended, period of a probationary sentence. So things have gotten really, really out of balance. One other point I want to make, which others have made as well, but I think it bears repeating. This is not an act of charity. This is not simply an act of goodwill on behalf of or towards the tens of thousands who are in this predicament right now. This is very much in all of our interests. It is in everybody's interest, because we know, as Senator Champion and others have said, that if someone who is in this situation feels that they have a say or a stake in outcomes and in society, they are far less likely to re-offend. So if for no other reason, we know that this kind of behavior, this kind of conduct, what Senator Champion rightly calls pro-social behavior, is in all of our interests. That person is not going to feel as marginalized. That person is going to feel included. That person is going to feel like they belong, and as a result, we know they are far, far less likely to reoffend. So this is in everybody's interest, all of us and all of our constituents. And if for no other reason, it is worth doing. It's time to make this right and once and for all restore the right to vote for those who have left prison behind. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Let's see, any questions?
Senator Champion. The next person you have on the list is Wintanam Malikan.
Hello, everybody.
Ms. Malikan, state your name for the record and continue with your testimony.
Yeah, Wintana Melikin. Close. So thank you for having me, everyone. My name is Wintana Melikin from St. Paul, Minnesota. Particularly, the reason that I'm here is that I've been an advocate for voting rights for many pieces of legislation for the last decade. But in 2018, I changed my work. I ended up opening a restaurant. The restaurant was very successful. I was actually able to sell it to someone else. Since then, my family has been able to open a chain of 7 restaurants everywhere from Rochester to St. Paul, Minnesota, including food trucks and another one coming out in the next couple weeks. One particular incident that has always been on my mind is in 2018, for Election Day, I wanted to shut down our restaurant and give all of my staff the opportunity to go out, participate. And what they actually said to me was that all of them were on probation. They all did not have the right to vote. One of them in particular talked about the red sticker actually making them feel bad about how they wanted to be in the restaurant, how they wanted to be busy, because they didn't want to see everyone with the red sticker and not them. These are folks that are paying taxes. These are folks that are participating in society. These are folks who are doing all the right things, including supporting businesses, traditionally in the service industry, the places that they can find work, and they're doing great things for our community, but yet they're denied their basic civil right. And I think now is the time to get it done and to just basically do the right thing. I know the chambers, state and local, have been supportive of this legislation. I know that business leaders, from CEOs to small businesses, have been supporters of this legislation, and I think now is the time to get it done. And so I just urge all of you who believe in fair taxes and supporting small businesses, large and small, to support this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Milliken.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Champion.
I echo everything that the testifier just said, but I'm disappointed that she didn't bring any food from any one of those 7 restaurants.
I thought the same thing, Senator Champion.
In order for us to be able to eat. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next testifier you have on is Mr. Ken Peterson. Mr. Commissioner, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Ken Peterson, and I'm here today representing the Clean Elections Minnesota, a nonpartisan nonprofit that supports fair elections in our state. And before I go on, I want to say something about how proud I am. 20 years ago, I was a Deputy Attorney General. I had 2 outstanding attorneys work under me, and they're both here today, President Champion and Secretary of State Simon. They're both outstanding attorneys, and I think they've been outstanding civil servants or public servants for our state. I urge members to support this bill. It's a good bill, and you've heard all the very good argument. Welcome these estimated 50,000+ people to back into our society and restore their rights. studies show that restoring civil rights helps reduce recidivism and thus improves public safety. One thing I think we should point out, there is no real sound public policy for denying the ability of people to vote. It just doesn't make any sense. And 22 states already do it. And I expect that more during this session this spring will do the same thing. But there doesn't seem to be any partisan advantage or partisan disadvantage to allowing unincarcerated people to vote. They've done their time, but the red states like Utah, Indiana, Montana, and North Dakota allow voting, as do blue states like California and New York, and also swing states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. There isn't a partisan advantage. There's not a partisan disadvantage. It's just the right thing to do. And I encourage you all to support the bill and get this on so Minnesota citizens get the same rights as they do in other states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
And, Mr. Chair, can I say that
Senator
I did
Champion.
enjoy my time when I was at the Attorney General's office, and it was good to have Ken Peterson, there and giving us some advice, and so I sincerely appreciate that. So I'm glad that he is able to be here today. So he has made me proud then and now to come and support this bill today. So I didn't know he was going to be here, so I'm excited about that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look how far you've come. Next testifier I have on here is Naomi Gaines-Young. Please hold the microphone close, state your name for the record, and continue with your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and thank you for having me here. My name is Naomi Gaines. I'm a formerly incarcerated individual. I lived on felony probation for 7 years after completing a 19-year sentence. Right now, I'm a community organizer and post-release support specialist for Minnesota Freedom Fund. We work to end oppressive jailing and reduce its harm to our community by paying cash bails and immigration bonds for people who cannot afford it. Right now, there are over 55,000, I think earlier was said 57,000 now, justice-involved people barred from voting in Minnesota. Over 84% of those individuals have completed their sentences and are currently living in their communities. How many of us, and how many of us more, continue to be disenfranchised after our probation ends because of confusion and fear about the right to vote? Such was the case for me. My parole ended on March 30th, 2022. However, my parole officer was nice enough to inform me that my voting right would be restored. She was a very good parole officer. We had a great rapport and very kind to me. However, she did tell me that there was a procedure involved to getting my right to vote, be it registering, but she was confused about that, and so was I. So I didn't vote last year because I also, combined with that confusion and reports of people being rearrested for not properly following the right procedures to reinstate that vote, I was too afraid to vote, and this prevented me from voting. So the stakes are high for me personally as well for the individuals in my community. In fact, our own U of M stated that voting helps formerly incarcerated individuals feel like they're part of something. I believe that was echoed earlier. Feel a part, like they have a standing in the community, like they're valuable, that they have a say. And more importantly, they are firmly, lawfully, socially, and politically firmly supplanted in that spot. So it reduces recidivism rates because people are involved in the political process. And if they're living their lives law-abiding, they're going to want to be involved in that and have a say. Legislator, you guys could remedy all of this right now. Is restoring the vote after someone's confinement in, not months, not years, as in my case. I implore all of you to restore this right to vote so formerly incarcerated individuals such as myself can share in their civic responsibility and their duty to make and create positive change in their community. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so, and I will be voting this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines-Young. Next person on the list is Sarah Florman. Please state your name for the record and continue with your testimony.
My name is Sarah Florman. Thank you, Chair Carlson and members of the committee. I am the Public Policy Manager at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or MNCASA. MNCASA is a statewide membership coalition driving transformative culture change to address sexual violence through advocacy, prevention, racial justice, and systems change. MNCASA acts as a collective voice of organizations and individuals committed to ending sexual violence. MNCASA supports the restoration of voting rights for individuals convicted of a felony upon completion of their incarceration. Our member programs serve formerly incarcerated people who've been victim survivors of sexual violence and sex trafficking. Many of these folks were convicted of felonies related to that violence, such as prostitution-related crimes or assault in self-defense. The criminalization of victim survivors of sexual violence for crimes related to their victimization is a profound injustice. All victim survivors deserve to use their voices freely at the ballot box. Restoring voting rights for formerly incarcerated individuals is also a violence prevention strategy. The level of support, connection, and community integration formerly incarcerated people experience upon release is critical in determining whether or not they're likely to reoffend. Taking away a formerly incarcerated person's ability to have a voice at the ballot box only further isolates them. When people can engage in civic responsibilities such as voting, they're able to become more connected to their communities, which in turn helps them to build relationships and establish strong support structures. People living in a community should expect to have a role and a voice in the issues that affect that community and their life. And formerly incarcerated victim survivors of sexual violence deserve to be heard at the ballot box. We urge you to restore their rights. Please vote yes on Senate File 26. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flowerman. Next person on the list is Ryan Hamilton. Please state your name for the record and continue with your testimony.
Chair Carlson and members of the Senate Elections Committee, my name is Ryan Hamilton. I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, the public policy voice of the Catholic Church in Minnesota. The Minnesota Catholic Conference is proud to be a part of the Restore the Vote Coalition and would like to express our support for Senator Champion's Senate File 26. Pope Francis has said, "Where there is no mercy, there is no justice." The Catholic Church has consistently advocated for responses to crime that do not simply punish, but also rehabilitate and restore. We must ask whether disenfranchising felons, after the courts have allowed them to return to their families and communities, serves any positive criminal justice purpose, or is it merely punishment for punishment's sake? There is no doubt that justice-involved individuals face significant collateral consequences once they leave prison. The inability to vote and have a say in the public decisions that affect their families is just another stumbling block to those trying to reconcile themselves to their communities. The restoration of voting rights is a critical step in giving people legitimate chances to forge new pathways in their lives. Catholics believe that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Offering a second chance to justice-involved individuals serves the common good of all Minnesotans. Please vote aye on favorable passage of Senate File 26.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. That ends the scheduled testifiers, and now we'll move into if there are questions from members. Senator Swazinski.
Thank you, Chair Carlson. I really don't have any questions. I just want to thank you, Senator Champion, for bringing this bill forward, and I tell you 3 reasons why. First one, the Declaration of Independence. 56 people signed that document, which is so much of our philosophy as a nation is founded in that document. And when those 56 people signed it, the delegates, the 17th grievance, there were 27 reasons why the colonists were going to declare their independence from King George III. And the 17th grievance says, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. We went to war with the British government for imposing taxes on us without our consent. And when you are paying property taxes because you own a home, and when you are paying sales taxes because you're buying your kids Christmas presents, and when you are paying gas tax because you got to fill your car with gas to go to work, and when you are filing income taxes and paying income taxes because upon release you have a job, I just think it's criminal to tax people without their consent. And when you don't have the right to vote, you have no way to consent to what the government's doing with your money. And either A, we stop taxing people on paper, or we restore the right to vote. The second reason I'd like to just share real quick is in honor of Martin Luther King's birthday yesterday, one of the great papers he wrote was Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And in Letter from a Birmingham Jail, he talks about just and unjust man-made laws. And he distinguishes a just man-made law from an unjust man-made law by saying just man-made laws uplift us, and unjust man-made laws do not. And thirdly, pre-COVID, I went to the women's prison in Shakopee to teach a class on civics, and it was quite an audience, incarcerated women to talk about civics with. And they were very wonderful, and they were polite and respectful and listened to everything I had to say. They were wonderful students, but they only applauded 2 of my ideas wholeheartedly, like enthusiastic applause. And one of my 2 ideas they applauded was this one. So thank you, Senator Champion, for bringing this forward. It really is long time overdue.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Champion. I am and have been, I'm not sure, other than maybe Senator Lemmer and maybe Senator Anderson, who were in the legislature in 2015, 2016, when we made the most progress on this bill. And your bill and this topic is now the subject of a research project for my intern. So that's why I'm asking a bunch of questions here, particularly about the history of your work. And and in 2015, as you noted, there was significant bipartisan agreement, and people did look, or reporters, and I don't mean the media reporters, but people that studied and looked at these issues were taken with the racial identity of those who would be affected in Minnesota. And it was overwhelmingly white males in greater Minnesota who would benefit from the restoration of their voting rights. Now, since 2015, 2016, there have been shifts in those incarcerated populations, but even the Republican Party, as I recall, said, yes, we want these people to vote because they're going to vote for us. They're conservatives politically, they're going to vote for us, and it is misinformation to say that this is a DFL plot to gain more voters. And I just think that history is fascinating, and there have been shifts in it, but it's one of those issues about which we say, now's the time. Now's the time for us to be able to do this. And in particular, even when people were off paper, we needed to and had resistance to having correct information provided to them about the restoration of their right to vote, as well as other rights, and their fears that if they acted inappropriately or illegally, they'd go back to prison. So I'm hoping that your bill, and as it's heard in the House, will have a lot of education in it for people who become eligible to vote, and in fact, maybe through the League of Women Voters or whatever organizations, that they are encouraged to vote. Once you're given the right to vote, the privilege of voting, how can we make sure that you take advantage of that and exercise that franchise? It's not enough, in my mind, to get the right. It's the exercising of the right of all people who are affected. So I hope at some point that the discussion turns on having been given, restore the right to vote. It's not a show us thing, but it's please consider it not only a right, but a privilege, and exercise it and go to the polls and vote. And I'm so grateful to you for this work over the years. And it needs to happen now. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Resk. Senator Champion, comments?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Rest, for your words. Two places where you can look at how there'll be awareness and really want to make sure that people know. Section 3 talks about the duties of the Secretary of State and information and the publication, and that being available electronically as well, and distributed and so on and so forth to judges, court personnel, probation officers, and others. Then you could also look at Section 5, where correctional facilities, when someone is leaving a correctional facilities, that they get information so they're very clear as to what rights are available to them. Once an individual is in our community, it becomes our collective responsibility and others to sort of talk about major issues that would be important to advance individuals' lives, and then they can determine what they want to do with their voice. And their voice is their right to vote. So so there will always be this educational component to it, and I hope that one will support the efforts here. I will say also that I did appreciate all the testifiers, but especially Mr. Hamilton, who's from the Catholic Conference, because it is so true, because I think we forget this, that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And that I think it is important for us to look forward, and how do we give individuals the tools and opportunities to look forward. Those Bible readers here, and I'm not suggesting that people have to do that. I'm just suggesting this, Senator Matthews will know about the prodigal son, and when the prodigal son even went out and did some things that his father wasn't always very pleased with, but once that son returned, the father went back and welcomed him and did not continue to throw, or remind him of the decision that he made. But what can we do in order to move people forward? So to me, that would be important. So thank you so very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Champion. Any more comments from members? Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Senator Champion, for all of your work on this bill. I think it is fitting that we are taking up this bill today on a day, earlier today we saw in the Capitol Rotunda filled with Minnesotans who are asking, expecting us to protect and expand our democracy, as you said so well. And this is a piece of that. Also, yesterday, having recognized Martin Luther King Jr. Day, as Senator Swedzinski mentioned, I was doing some reading for that and came across a quote that I think is applicable. And this is from Dr. King's 1957 speech entitled, "Give Us the Ballot." He said, "So long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself. I cannot make up my mind. It is made up for me. I cannot live as a democratic citizen, observing the laws I have helped to enact. I can only submit to the edict of others." And so I think as we think about what this means for people, community members, who are our friends and family and loved ones and neighbors, people in our communities all across the state, 50,000 plus people, this is the right thing to do, to be sure that they can use their voice and be fully part of society, and be able to have that freedom to vote, that right to vote, to have their voice heard. So this is the right thing to do now. I will be an enthusiastic yes and encourage all members to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bolden. Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question. So could you walk through what this bill does? I came in late, so maybe I missed it, but so this passes, say it passes. And so how is it implemented? How do we, the process of how, is it just a blanket thing or to instruct I don't know how it works. And then you mentioned about an educational piece too. I don't know if there was something that I missed on that too, but if you could answer those questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Senator, here's what the bill does. If you look in section 1, what it does is that it restores the civil rights for a person to vote who is no longer incarcerated for the offense. If the individual is later incarcerated for the same offense or some other offense, the individual's civil rights to vote is lost only during the period of incarceration. So if they're incarcerated, they can vote. If they're out in our community, they can vote. We've made it very clear that individuals who are out in our community after the judge and others have considered their sentence and decided that they should not be incarcerated, they're paying taxes, they're participating in pro-social activities, they're in our community. So this bill will give them the right to vote. Now, there's currently, just so you know, Senator, a statute 609.165 that says that a person who is on felony probation right now cannot vote if they're on probation. And in Minnesota, you know that we have long probationary sentences. And so whether it's 10 years, 15 years, the person's out, they're raising children, they can't vote. This would correct that. If you look in section 3, it also provides that the Secretary of State shall develop an accurate and complete information in a single publication about voting rights of people who have been charged with or convicted of a crime. That publication must also be available to a number of outlets for distribution, includes but not limited to judges, court personnel, probation officers, and the Commissioner of Corrections for distribution to correction officials, parole, and supervised release agents, and the public. Because we want people to be very clear. We think, or at least I think, based on Senate File 56, is that we should have a very bright line and not cause confusion, and folks will know exactly what needs to happen, and then there'll be the necessary corresponding information that would be helpful. If you then go to section 5, that is where if an individual, let's say for an example, is incarcerated, let's say a judge sentences them, or let's say they go back to go to prison after violating the terms of probation in any shape, form, or fashion, upon their release, section 5 talks about correctional facilities designated an official who then will share with that person when they're leaving that they will have the right to vote now once they are no longer incarcerated. And that also, there should also be an adequate supply of voter registration cards and applications and any other information that would be helpful. And that notice requirement must be provided. And we think that would make sense. One of the other things that I think is important to note is that we don't want people to return to prison. We don't want them to go to prison if they don't have to. If they do, that would be up to a judge. We don't want people to return to prison if judges and others have given them an opportunity to remain in our communities, but if they do, they can vote. But what are some of the things that will help make sure a person who has at one time or another made a bad decision, but now they're on the road to really doing positive things? We want to promote that positivity. And we know, based on all the data, that individuals who are involved in pro-social activities and engaged in being connected to our communities, recidivism goes down, which means the amount of time or the opportunity or the stats that would say that they will return goes down. We believe that as the notion of keeping people connected in our communities in a real way is important. Now, you also heard, because if you're on probation, there's usually a requirement for you to be employed and/or going to school and participating in any other programming that probation deems necessary. So if they're employed, that means they're paying taxes. They're also buying groceries, gas. You heard all the other things that they're doing. And if individuals in our community raising children and families and doing all these things, that means they're being taxed without representation. That means they can't make a decision even about school board or any of the other roles, whether that's school board, whether that's county commissioner, state legislators, park board, you name it, whatever it is, whatever comes to your mind when you think in terms of someone being in an elected office, that person doesn't have the ability to do that if we do not change the law and allow them to vote. And they should have the right to do that. They should be able to say what happens in their children's school and who should represent their district. They should be able to say, who's my city council member? Who's the best person to represent our interests? They should be able to say, who should be president of the United States or secretary of state? You name it, you fill in the blank. The more connected an individual is to society, the better outcomes we all enjoy. So that's what this does. And last but certainly not least, there was an amendment that was also included here that just talks about updates to the Voters' Bill of Rights to reflect the individual's felonies who are no longer incarcerated have the right to vote, and it adds a $13,000 appropriation to cover the fiscal note. That was a part of the amendment, but that's what it does, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Dornick, follow-up?
Mr. Chair?
Senator Corn.
What stops and where's this bill going next?
Mr. Chair?
It goes to Judiciary, Senator.
And then it will be back on, then it'll be on to the floor? General
Then
orders?
it goes to Finance.
Oh, finance, okay.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, Senator Champion, you know, we've had some great conversations about this, and I would hope that we do have an opportunity to look and get this to a bipartisan manner where we could support it. As you know, I've lived it. Yeah, I have a son who's convicted felon. It's 10 years probation. I never once looked at it and said, you know, that was a key component to restoration of his voting rights. He had a long sense of a serious, violent, you know, crime. And never once did it cross my mind. It was more about how do we get him functioning, right? A job. We all talk about the job, living conditions, and we all know what those things have. I've lived it. I've lived through hell. And so I'd hope that we could find an opportunity. There's a couple stops left, and that we can continue to work together and look at and say, all right, is there a period of time where we could come across and truly have a bipartisan bill? I don't know if you're willing to see that or open that, regardless of what a probationary period would be, but I'm just not there yet from a perspective of just incarceration, whatever that particular lockup period and where the current judiciary system is. I'm just not comfortable with that. So if there's an opportunity that we have to work together and look at a period of time that we could bring across and truly make this a bipartisan win across the board, I would love to continue to keep having that conversation as it moves forward, and then to a final vote. So with that, but at this point, Senator Champion, I'm a no, and then I will request a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Thank you, Senator Corin.
Mr.
And I'm
Chair.
hoping that you do get to meet with Senator Champion and get to
Mr.
that.
Chair, I share the same goal.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Champion.
To Senator, and thank you, Senator Coran. It is right that you and I have had lots of conversations, as I have with others around this table, because I think it's important to engage people as much as humanly possible. What I will say is that I'm thankful that your son made it through his probationary period, and even though it's true that you probably didn't think about it, but I would almost guarantee you that he did. And we don't sometimes think about it because our rights are restored. my rights are not taken away. And so it's true. I don't always think about it, but others do, who can't vote, who can't go. We heard the story about from one of the testifiers who talked about others who said they need to be busy because they had a hard time dealing with the right not to vote. And I'm always willing to have a conversation, and I think disagreement is just an opportunity to find agreement. If we can't, and sometimes I just believe that sometimes we have to go alone. We'd love to have your support. We don't want anything messing up this bill, causing any more confusion. We want to make sure that individuals, that 50 plus that included your son, has the right to vote and make decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Champion. Next on the list is Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was comforted that there was at least one voice that represented victims in the testimony today. I was comforted for that, but I'm not satisfied with that. We have a lot of discussion in the last few years about the plight of inmates, but we don't hear a whole lot about victims. I've studied this for many years, and I think one has to realize where Minnesota is now. You have to understand how Minnesota compares to the rest of the country. We do not, as you have said, we do not rely on incarceration to handle those who victimize our innocent citizens. We rely more on probation, as you have said, and that is why we have longer probations. And it's a balance between the shorter incarceration rates that we have. Part of that non-incarceration penalty is the loss of some civil rights. And that is somewhat universal in every state in the country. Some states have had a lifetime restriction on voting. Some still may still do that. I haven't checked it in a couple of years. But Minnesota's practice of holding on to the civil rights prohibition of voting is reflective pretty close to what the other states are. However, 22 states have gone down this path that you've proposed. It's rather historic that Minnesota has continued to do this. If you victimize our innocent citizens, sometimes with a heinous act of criminality, something that will scar that victim for a lifetime, this proposal says that you can be restored your civil rights only after you serve part of your sentence. Part of your sentence is the incarceration. The other part of the sentence, thanks to Minnesota's short incarceration rates, is probation. And with it is combined the restriction for voting, among other things. My particular interest in this has led me to study other states that have gone down this path. I have heard it over and over that recidivism will go down when voting rights are restored. That has not been my study conclusions. Recidivism doesn't change much. And it's pretty well constant over many, many years of my study of criminology. College courses will tell you that. I know that my study on other states that have gone down this path, recidivism just simply does not change. I haven't seen any studies of the people that say it does. They banter about it, but I don't see it. And I suppose when you do get close to that discussion, people will give you the flip answer of saying, well, that's how it depends on how you define recidivism. Well, I'd like to see a universal definition of recidivism. To me, recidivism means after you committed one crime and after a period of time of being released, you commit another, that's recidivism. You're abusing the rights of law-abiding citizens. And so, in this case, I'm not convinced at all that we should go down this path. And Senator, your reference to the prodigal son in the Bible, that prodigal son was a repentant son that fell into the embrace of his father. You kind of missed that part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Senator Limmer. Next person I have on the list is
I know
Senator
this is
Westland.
something different, please. This is a matter of decorum.
Senator Rest.
We have a Senate tradition as well as a rule that the only photography allowed in a committee room or on the floor of the Senate has to be done by members of the media or by Senate photographers. So I would ask that you ask that person there to stop photographing us.
We're trying to clear that up, whether that applies to committees. Do you know that there's a rule on committees specifically?
Certainly custom and usage, and it's not about, freedom of the press is one thing, but within the committee rooms or on the floor of the Senate, it's my recollection of many years that it's not allowed. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank the person there for honoring my request.
I get counsel from counsel that the rule only applies to the Senate chamber, and that for committees, it's up to the chair of the committee. And
Would be my
personally,
request that you would impose that rule in this committee, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Senator Rest, I'm going to say that it is okay. These days, there are so many ways to take photographs with cameras, and I don't think we're doing anything incorrect here. So I'm going to just allow that happens. So thank you, Senator Rest.
Mr. Chair?
And next person on my list here.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Limmer. Senator Limmer, there's a couple things that I would call to your attention. Usually when we have this discussion, no matter if it's years ago or any other time, your first argument is usually that you have not heard from victims. One, I usually point to the fact that victims are able to come in. There's nothing that creates a barrier for anyone to come in and speak on this record. And I also know that we did have someone here from Mikasa, and you indicated that that person wasn't enough. I'm not quite sure what the number would be in order to be enough, in order for you to cross that threshold to saying that's the number. I think if it's one person who comes in and talks about what they think or feel, that is enough, because they are equally as important and represent the interests of other people who are in a like position. And let's also be clear that not every offense that a person is charged with a felony for is a heinous offense. That's important because that provocation or that provocative speech usually makes it come across as if everyone who's a felon has done something heinous. We can say they've done something wrong, but you can get a felony for if you have a trap and the wrong animal is in your trap. That's a felony. Check kiting, where somebody's using their own check and they are banking on the direct deposit getting there in time, and it doesn't get there in time, and then their check bounce. Even though I know it's been a long time since we've written a check, it's still possible. That is a felony. A person goes into a store, let's say Macy's, and steals a jacket or tries to steal a jacket that's over a certain dollar amount, and they get caught. That's a felony. So let's be careful that when we are describing this, that we're not assigning every felony to be heinous. Wrong, yes, but not heinous. And it's true, I'm not suggesting that Macy's or anyone else should be subject to theft and somebody stealing something, or a young person who's stealing a car, any of that. I'm not suggesting that that's okay. But here's the other thing that you mentioned and around the prodigal son. You're correct about repentance, but here's where you're wrong. In most sentencing or dispositions, you don't get either a downward departure or mercy if you don't speak to remorse. That's specifically in the statute. Remorse and acceptance of responsibility. Those important notions. But here's what's most important. I don't want to go back and forth about whether someone is repentant or remorseful or not. What I can say is that there's at least 21 other states who made that decision. Now, you say you've done your research about recidivism and so on and so forth. I'm not going to argue whether you haven't. That's not for me to wrestle with. What is important for us to wrestle with is whether individuals, those 50,000+ people who are living in our communities, have a right to vote, and whether we're going to give them that right to vote. Are we going to restore their right to vote? And you're right that some states do lifetime bans. Good people can make bad decisions, and they clearly just made a bad decision. But we've made a bad decision too, because we are disenfranchising people, and we're not dealing with the fundamental notion of democracy. When you think in terms of decisions that we make, we must make them, and we must do things that send a clear message. We don't want to send a message that only certain people should have the right to vote, or people are third-class citizens. We're Americans, and even we as Americans make mistakes. But we should not be perpetually punished because of our mistake. And so even when you think in terms of probation, there's not a nexus. If there was a nexus, then I could get it. It's sort of like if someone was drinking and driving, there's a reason why you take away their driver's license or tell them that they have to do UAs, which is urine analysis, or random urine analysis, whatever it is, because there's a nexus between the behavior and the consequence. So, Senator Limmer, thank you always for your perspective. I don't necessarily agree with that perspective. And I believe that we have an opportunity to change some policy that has been implemented that we see as Minnesota Statute 609.165. And we have been known to change things in this body. So this is not a one-off. This is an appropriate exercise, exorcism of our role and our insight as policymakers. So thank you, Senator Limmer. Thank you so very much.
Senator Limmer, follow-up.
Thank you, Senator, Mr. Chairman. Senator Champion, you made a list of seemingly accidental felony crimes that someone might commit. Yeah, we do have those kind of statutes on the books. But we also have a few others on the books too. And we could go down a long list of those that are considered violent crimes in the state of Minnesota. Among those could be torture of a child, aggravated theft, the use of a weapon to impose a threat of fear, or an assault. Not to mention all of the sexual misconduct and rape charges that one could come up with and envision. The problem that I see in your bill is that you put these seemingly accidental felony crimes and treat the people that have committed the more serious ones in the same pot. And you're going to treat them the same way. And usually the more serious the crime, with the exception of first-degree murder, usually there's a track record of repeat recidivism. And I think I would hope you would agree with me that good citizenship requires responsibility. Responsibility to do a number of things. But more important than voting is to treat our fellow man respectfully and not abuse them and not victimize them. And in this case, you're asking for the state to go in a different direction than where it's been before, with the hope that recidivism will go down. And so I suppose you and I are pretty skilled at going back and forth on debate. I enjoy visiting with you at times. And there's a few times I don't enjoy it, but nevertheless, I think we'll be at this point where we just agree to disagree.
And Mr. Chair, just briefly.
Senator Champion.
So thank you for your words, Senator Limmer. You used the word accidental. That's not criminal law. Even your recitation of different offenses. In criminal law, there must be criminal intent. It's not accidental. Accidental, those things like you're driving and you don't see someone and you hit them. That's different. The articulation of the offenses that you laid out is not accidental. No, I'm making the case that all crimes have usually criminal intent, even assault. So those are, and they're low-level assaults that are misdemeanors. And some things are enhanceable, other things are not. But here, when you use the word responsibility, it's the responsibility of the other professionals that we put in place to determine if a person should be on our street, if public safety supports it, or if they should be incarcerated. There are even provisions in criminal law that allows for a prosecutor to ask for aggravating factors, as there are opportunities to ask for mitigating factors. The legislature should not be in the business of trying to determine if someone should be incarcerated or not. We're in the business of making certain that all of our citizens are treated humanely. So there has to be criminal intent. It's not accidental. None of the notions are accidental. And we should rely on our judges. We do, because they're the third branch of government. And so they have the right to decide what should happen to someone. But we should focus on restoring the vote and making it very clear and not creating confusion in the marketplace. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Senator Champion. We need to make sure that we narrow it down to what's under our authority here, and that is the ability to restore a person's vote, not necessarily how we should prosecute the offender. So next person on my list is Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Champion. Good discussion that we've had so far. I echo what some of my colleagues have said. Unfortunately, I'm not ready to vote for this bill today. I've got people in my district, constituents, even those that are politically aligned with me. I think this bill has the chance to be bipartisan, but today, what we've been handed to vote on today is not a bipartisan bill from my read-through, and that's disappointing. Because I have, as I was saying, I've got constituents that have spoken to me on this issue, that have talked about some of the testimony that came forward and shared your experience on what you've gone through. I think Minnesota has gone too far off the one side, off the ditch on one side of the road, so to speak, in how we have handled some of these sentences in the past. And I believe there is room to find ways to reel some of that back in. But we've just been given a bill that just says it's across the board. After incarceration, you're back out. I might even get a contact, saying I saw you voted against a Restore the Vote bill, and I'll explain, well, that may be the headline. Look into what the details are, and we'll see how my constituent feels going through the details. But Mr. Chair, you've talked about wanting to have bipartisan work done in this committee, and still hoping that that happens, because it doesn't appear to be happening much here today. One of my main reasons is, as has been alluded to, we're in a system right now where other places in statute, there is strong pressure to lower and reduce both incarceration rates and the probationary rates. And so, yeah, we may set the standard that's good, that, hey, let's keep it to just the incarceration period, but that's the caveat that we're not talking about, and I know it's not in this committee's jurisdiction, but that's the catch in all of this, is going, the incarceration rates are clearly going down in the not too distant past, and there's continued pressure to make them continue to go down. And I do not think that is a good cross trajectory of these two issues going at it. It would be easier to find common solutions in something like this if we had a confidence that we were enforcing the law and enforcing the statutes and mandatory minimums that we have, but that's not always being done, and I'm hearing more and more of those stories on a regular basis of instances where someone who was released back out very lightly compared to what their offense had been is back out, causing more harm to people. And I think there is a public policy argument in somewhere in the middle between the bill that we have before us and the status quo of what we're practicing right now. You know, there's a public policy argument to be made. We've been listing different crimes of varying severity around here. But I think too, if you go to the homicide side of our criminal law, those people have permanently removed the ability to vote of those victims. Permanent. And it isn't a grave injustice that you or I or no one here can ever be able to reverse, and that's a terrible thing. But that was a part of the public policy piece, and going, you know, if you stop someone else from being able to exercise the right to vote via an act of homicide, a previous legislature looked at that and said that should be justification for you not being able to exercise your right to vote for a period of time. So before us today is a bill that I think goes from too far off one direction to too far off the opposite direction. And we talk about wanting to do bipartisan work here. I believe there's potentially space to do that. It's not here. And my colleague, Senator Rest, pointed out an area she highlighted as misinformation that flies around some of the arguments for and against this issue. And I'll highlight another one that I think is often used going the other way. There's a lot of misinformation going around that only one party is interested in trying to find a solution for Restore the Vote. And they may take this language as proof or justification of doing so because they want to just read the headline instead of drilling down into the details and figure out where we might find bipartisan solutions in there. And I hear groups on the campaign trail that even use those language going, you know, it can be a partisan thing out there. It's not to me, and it's not to many others. And when you hear that out on the campaign trail, know that that is false misinformation going around. Unfortunately, the bipartisan solutions aren't what I'm reading here yet today. And I hope we do get there. I think there's room to figure out where's the road that we can drive the car on so we're not falling in the ditch on one side or the other side. But Unfortunately, this goes further than I'm able to vote for today by having just a blanket using incarceration as the standard and figure out where we go from there. So I hope that there is interest in trying to figure out where there can be areas that we reach agreement on and reach consensus on. Hope this bill comes back here then so that we can work on that. But the product we have today does not meet that standard, in my opinion. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Matthews. And I guess what I need to request is that you're on the Judiciary Committee as well, and I hope you're not anymore. Oh, I'm sorry. I think, well, at least we do have Senator Limmer on it, so I'm hoping that you can work with perhaps Senator Limmer and Senator Champion to come up with what could be accepted. What are the bipartisan suggestions? Because we want this to be bipartisan. We want those things to be heard, want the level-headedness to come out of these committees, and I think that gives us the opportunity to maybe hear the other side, and perhaps we can come out with something that has some bipartisan support. The next person on my list is Senator Westland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. President, I have a few questions and then a statement, and I will try and keep it short. Mr. Chair and Mr. President, if someone has their right to vote restored following incarceration, are they still required to fulfill the terms of their probation?
Mr. Chair and Senator Western, yes, they still have to complete probation. They're not taken off probation. They still have to follow programming, check in, do everything that probation requires them to do.
And Mr. Chair and Mr. President, I'm trying to go back through all of these statements that you've made today. Did you say at any point in your testimony, or did any of the other individuals in their testimony state that voting rights was the one thing that would lower recidivism?
Senator Champion.
Mr. Chair, and to the testifier, no. I said that it could be something that could help an individual whenever they're connected to pro-social activities, and voting is one of those activities, but also working is one of those activities. There's all these other things. That is what helps keep a person connected in our community, and it will lessen their desire, based on what we've seen with all of our data, to return to unlawful behavior, whether that's to go back to prison or doing anything else unlawful.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Westman.
Mr. President, so what I understand you to be saying is that recidivism is reduced by making sure someone has housing, that they have health care, that they have a job, that they have all of the things that allow them to fulfill the obligations of their probation and to become reconnected with society as a full member of the community. Is that correct?
And Mr.
Senator
Chair,
Champion.
Senator, absolutely, because those are the things that keep a person engaged and involved. We want to make sure that they have all the tools to remain in the community and be a productive member of society. I've heard, things about people, who are murderers and so on and so forth. If you just look at our statute, you understand that those folks are in prison for a long period of time, and that's kind of a red herring.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Senator
President,
Westman.
my understanding is that in the state of Minnesota, is this true that black men are disenfranchised at a rate 7 times higher than that of white men? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Senator, that's correct.
And Mr. Chairman
Senator
and Mr.
Westman.
President, are you familiar with the documentary 13th?
I am.
Senator Champion.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes.
And Mr. Chairman
Senator Westman.
and Mr. President, the statistics from that particular documentary, and for those who haven't seen it, you should add that to your list of must-see. Nationally, that documentary stated that the lifetime likelihood for a black man to be in prison is 1 out of 3. The lifetime likelihood of a white man to be in prison is 1 in 17. Black men make up 6.5% of the population in our country, and they are represented 40.2% of the prison population. The documentary spends a lot of time talking about mass incarceration, began with the war on drugs and so on, systemic disenfranchisement, decimation of leadership in Black communities in particular. Martin Luther King himself, the person we lionized and everyone celebrated yesterday, was considered by the head of the FBI to be the most dangerous man in the United States. And so, Mr. Chair and Mr. President, it seems to me that the restoration of the vote here is about equity and it is about justice. Would you agree with that?
Mr. Chair and Senator, I would agree with that.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I'm just going to conclude with a statement that I think it's very important that we not merge sentencing guidelines and what sentences should be with a bill that is simply seeking to restore the vote of someone who still may have terms to fulfill. They will be required to fulfill those terms. If they do not fulfill their terms, their probation can be revoked and they will be incarcerated again. This is an issue of justice. This is an issue of equity. This is an issue that has disproportionately affected the Black community, communities of color, and in particular, Black men. And the best way to re-engage people in society is to make sure that when they come out of prison, that they have a job, that they have the opportunity to get an education, that they have the opportunity to parent their children, that they have the opportunity to have housing, transportation. All of the things that make us successful in our lives are the same things that people need coming out of incarceration. I support this bill because it is time that we restore the vote to folks who have in fact fulfilled their incarceration, their sentencing, and who will continue to do work to reintegrate with our society. And I ask my colleagues to vote yes.
Thank you, Senator Westland. Any comments, Senator Champion?
No, I think that, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Senator. I think she summed it up correctly.
I have two more people on our list here, and I see that it is 4:30, and we're getting really close to the end here, so I want to make sure that we are concise in our comments. Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think from the comments, first of all, of Senator Westland, what's really important, Mr. Chairman and Senator Champion, is that we all agree on the facts that are presented, and then we can have our own interpretations of it. So I hope in going forward in your next committee that some of these statistics and so forth are presented with footnoting of what their sources are. And then with regard to Senator Matthews' comments, Mr. Chairman, Senator Matthews, I think you got pretty close to questioning the motives of members of our party, and I would just offer a general reminder that you have strong arguments and you don't need to do that. Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Rest.
And Mr. Chairman, it's your job to remind us when we get into that dangerous zone of questioning each other's motives.
Thank you, Senator Rest. I have Senator Barr on next comment. You've been waiting forever, so.
Mr. Chair, I can wait. If
Okay.
it looks like Senator Matthews wants to respond directly, I'll wait till
That
they're
would be
done.
fine. Yeah,
Thank
Senator
you.
Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and Senator Rest, wasn't my intent. Apologies if it was taken that way. I do hold myself to the same Senate rules that I expect from everyone else too. So appreciate the general reminder, and yes, we vigorously and passionately debate our issues here in the Senate. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Matthews. I have to say that I'm not very sensitive, so I didn't pick up on it. Senator Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question on decorum. I don't know. I was just asking Senator Cran. He wasn't sure either. Am I supposed to address you as Senator Champion or Mr. President?
Mr. Chair, Senator Barr, just Senator while we're sitting here.
In committee.
God. Because I've heard it both ways here today, and I wanted to get it right. So thank you. And I did want to comment, thank you. We haven't had a chance to talk yet, and that's not either of our fault. It's just, it's new in session, and I'm new to the Senate, so I get that. Don't take any offense there. I would like to have a conversation with you about this, because while many of the people have brought up heinous crimes and things like that, I'm going to give you an example, because I do support restoring voting rights, but not this particular version, and that's why I'd like to have a conversation with you. So I'm going to give you one of the reasons that I do support this. I live in North Anoka County, and we have a neighboring county of Sherburne. So there's two kids that I'm familiar with these two cases. Both of them at 18 years old had felony amounts of marijuana, which isn't a whole lot. They both got 20 years probation, no jail time. So this bill would mean neither one of them would ever have their voting rights suspended, because neither one of them went to jail. Now the problem comes in, and why I think that we need some reform here, is that the counties have the option of cutting that parole short, or not parole, I guess it's a supervision, but they have the ability to cut that shorter if they've seen a change in their behavior. They don't believe it's necessary anymore. So both of these two individuals, one went to work, got a really good job. He's doing, $80,000, $90,000 a year job, supporting his family, 3 kids, great. The other guy actually started a business, had 10 people working for him. The guy with the business, the county he lived in would not shorten up they said, you were 20 years and you're going to do all 20 probation. You're going to do all 20 years of your probation. We're not letting you off. So he didn't have his voting rights restored for 20 years. In fact, I think he's like in the last few years of that. And the other guy, at 5 years, he got his rights restored. Neither one of them went to jail. And so that's where I see the problem is, we talk about like some of the minor, well, they're all crimes, but the minor, lower terms, felony crimes, you might not even go to jail because we have such long probationary periods on them. So yes, I do believe we need to look at this. This is something that seriously needs to be addressed, but I'm not going to support the clear, bright line of you're in jail or you're out of jail as where your voting rights are brought up, but I would love to talk with you a little bit more offline with that if we could. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
Chair
Barr.
and Senator Barr.
Champion.
Thank you for your comments. 2 things. One, I'm always open to having conversation. I always think that's important to do, and we can certainly talk. Number 2, the illustration that you just articulated is the real challenge, because if you leave it in the hands of counties to decide if they're going to let somebody off early or not, and even though they never went to jail, it's for a small amount of marijuana, but felony level based on what you just said. Now you got a person who is making $80,000, $90,000 a year, doing the work, paying taxes, raising families, can't vote, can't decide even where the kid goes. You have another individual who's also in a different county, but also not incarcerated, doing everything that they can to start a business, hire other people, and they still can't vote. To me, that is unfortunate, and this bill addresses that. Sorry if you feel like you cannot support it, but I think you have laid out the argument that is most informative, one of the most informative arguments as to why you should support this. Because even though others are painting it as light on crime or doing something, when you start just saying things and not being thoughtful on both sides, then I think that's where we missed the mark. This is a responsible and constructive policy that I hope that even if you don't support it today, that you will be bothered by your decision to not support it today and support it the next time you see it.
Thank you, Senator Champion. It is 4:37. We want to try to finish this up pretty quickly here. Hopefully, we can have a vote by 4:45. But I am supposed to ask if there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak for or against the bill. And I'd like to also say that, please, if you speak for or against it, that you bring up new information. Anyone like to speak for or against the bill in the audience? You have a little bit more to say. Let's see. That's Ms.
Hi.
Gaines-Young.
I'm going to keep this really quick. My name's Naomi Gaines-Young, and I had a very serious, high-profile crime back in 2003, and I'm pretty sure most of you know what that is. If not, you can look it up. I don't want to digest that here. But that was the result of an untreated mental illness. And it was spoken earlier about the disenfranchisement of the black man and the black people in the black community. And my case was a result of untreated mental illness, but a failure in the mental health system in Minnesota to treat, to inform, to educate, and to make me and my family aware of what a mental illness is and the dangers of what can happen when it's untreated. So everybody who's in prison, I just want to say, is not a criminal, and not all criminals are in prison. Everybody has done something that they're not proud of, but most of us didn't get caught. But I consider my time incarcerated as a healing time, a time to educate, a time to love myself, a time to educate others about mental illness and the dangers of ignoring it. And since then, my mental illness and that incident has been criminalized. And I never broke a law before that, had never had a criminal record, never even had much of a traffic ticket before that time. But in the case, I was deemed legally sane by Minnesota State, even though those laws have been on the books since the early 1800s and have not been amended or changed since then. But what we're here to talk about is the vote. And I desperately want a say in my community and what I do and where I go and my children. And I want to show them an example, and my community an example of what happens when someone redeems themselves, when someone who has shown remorse, and when someone has made a meaningful contribution to the community and learn from that mistake. And I just don't want anyone to disenfranchise me any longer to have a voice. And even if you guys vote no today on this bill, I want you to know that you're going to know more about Naomi Gaines, more about mental illness, and more about the plight of the black community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines-Young. Do we have another person who would like to testify? Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Hi, my name is Cecily McMillan, and I was the Communications Director and Outreach Coordinator for Lee Finke. I am also newly elected to the DFL Stonewall Board, and I have a college education, I have a master's degree, I have been asked to publish a book, I have published a book. My first campaign that I ever ran was at 23, a congressional candidate from the Black nationalist communities out of the working families of New York, and I'm a violent felon. In 2012, I was beaten by 6 officers after I was sexually assaulted, the 31st of the women who were participating in Occupy Wall Street as a method, a seatbelt grab from here to here that had been suspended by the NYPD several years prior because it would require you to necessarily sexually assault a woman. And they used it in order to deter women from speaking up. I refused, and I was the only person of 7,000 people to plea out over the course of the arrest of Occupy Wall Street. I was a staunchly nonviolent activist, studying Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You as my therapy from the violent past that I grew up in. I was the first person to go to college. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American in my family. My mother's from Mexico. And I got all the way to Occupy Wall Street just to contain the chaos that I saw there, to seek a demand. And for that, for being invited to Washington to fight for unions and community organizations to be able to have space within the media circus that was arising, I was targeted. I was disappeared. I was put in jail. People all across the United States and the world came to my defense. 10 of the 12 jurors asked that I be let out of prison, and for the rest of my life in New York City, and now here, I will be a violent felon. But you know what? I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm winning the lottery. I'm 97.7% above every average out there, and I was the only woman in the whole of Rikers Island who ever went to trial. I was released in 58 days of my sentence, mandatory 2 years, and I had the highest conviction, the most violent crime in Rikers Island. You don't know what you're talking about. And if people can't vote, if that is where we want to keep them, then why let them out anyway? They're good enough to live next door to you, to go pick up their kids at your kids' schools, but they can't vote? How does that make any sense?
Thank you, Ms. McMillan. I think we're going to go to a vote now, but I do have to take a, it looks like we'll have one more. Come on, please come up and sit down. But I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair and tell a bit of my own story here to tell you how bipartisan this is. I was doing door knocking a few years ago for re-election. I walked up a driveway. There was a fellow working on his car in the garage, and I said, "Hello, I'm Senator Jim Carlson. I'm running for re-election." And he said, I don't want you on my driveway. He said, "You guys took away my ability to vote. I don't care what party you are. I want to kick you out of office, and the only thing I can do is kick you off my driveway. Get off my driveway." Now, I want that person to be able to vote and express himself. So that's something that, that really I'm dedicated to, is making sure that people can express themselves in the way that is really legitimate and not just threaten a politician, any one of us, that comes up on their driveway. So that's my position on this. And now we have another testifier here. Please identify yourself for the record, and
my name is
really brief testimony, please.
Sure. And I'm getting that same suggestion from my senator. My name is Brian Foreman. I'm one of the lead organizers for Isaiah Faith of Minnesota. Before then, I was formerly incarcerated myself years ago in the state of Illinois, not here in Minnesota, but in '98. I just want to say for the record that we really, really need to concentrate on what inclusion is. I know that we have an idea of what that is, but to tell you how people feel when they are excluded, for people to be limited in their imagination for what's possible for them in this country, ultimately in this state, has a lot to do with the intentionality of how we're including people. When I'm out, I'm not in here a lot because I'm in the field, and I'm talking to people every day. And I'm telling you, if people start to feel like they're part of the state of Minnesota, you're actually going to see more productivity out of them. Forget your numbers, forget all the intelligent arguing you all are doing. I'm telling you from somebody who's on the grounds, people feel hopeless and cynical about government when they're not being included. Please start to challenge yourselves about real inclusion and why you're here in the first place. I'll let you go.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Senator Champion, any last comments?
Only comments I can say, I'd love to get your support. Thank you to Brian Foreman, whose name I did have on my list right here. But I was telling the others, come on, I need a vote. So thank you. I really would hope that you would support this piece of policy, and those who express a desire to talk to me, I'm always open to still have conversation, whether we agree or not. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Senator Champion, and thank you to the members here for a really robust conversation. It's not finished. It's, there is the Judiciary Committee in the floor, and I really welcome the ideas that you have, and I'm hoping that we can reach a point where we can get bipartisan support. With that, Senator Westland moves that the bill be passed, that Senate File 26, as amended, be passed and referred to the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. All in favor say aye.
No. Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have a roll call requested. Okay, roll call requested. Yes, our assistant will take the roll.
Senator Carlson.
Aye.
Senator Westland.
Aye.
Senator Curran.
No.
Senator Anderson.
No.
Senator Barr,
No.
Senator Bolden. Senator Swedzinski,
Yes.
Senator Dornick,
No.
Senator Limmer,
No.
Senator Marty. Senator Matthews,
No.
Senator Mitchell.
Aye.
Senator Port is absent. Lastly, Senator Rest.
Yes.
There being 7 yeses and 6 noes, the bill is passed and referred. And with that, we have no other business on our agenda. The meeting is adjourned.